Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be here and picking up on some of the themes earlier on. I will try to explain to you why I think the entire science system will have to have a deep, hard look at itself in all its components and see what needs to be done to address some big issues. So, not far from here is the Museum für Naturkunde Berlin. And I hope in your spare time you will come and pay us a visit. It is, I can promise you, worth your while. And one of our exhibits is this biodiversity wall. So I will try to talk to you about why we need open science a bit through the lens of biodiversity. So one of the claims to fame of my organization is that we are part of the system you all support. When in 1810 Wilhelm von Humboldt looked at the Prussian educational system, he decided that it needed reform. Did you know how long it took him to reform the Prussian educational system? Any idea? Can anybody throw in a number? 9 months. Any politicians in the room? I think that's, if we are lucky, is the time they will need to take to form a government in this country. Now, apart from all of that, he established the research university, the university that you all now serve. And you probably know that the model that he established here in Berlin became the model for the rest of the world. But what you do not know is that this university was formed around collections of objects in order to verify what may or may not derive as knowledge and information out of these. So, what you see behind me here is part of the foundation of the academic system as we know it and as we all work in it. The other claim to fame is, these collections are the collection of the Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz and the Natural History Museum, and we roughly split 50-50. I have just about 30 million objects in our collections, and that's just the ones we've counted. Anyway, so what we also do is we describe the natural world, and 10% of all species that exist on Earth, apparently, or that we have described so far, and we will come to that in a minute, are in my museum. So we are an eminent treasure trove for the diversity of life. And now coming to the first speaker, we also describe new species, actually quite a lot. So if you want an organism, perhaps not necessarily a parasite, named after you, you can come and talk to me over lunch. We do a lot, and we do it day and night. We've also been lucky to be given quite a big chunk of money to accelerate that process. Anyway, so here we go with biodiversity. And just to give you a quick idea where we are with this and what publishing has to do with it or open science. So these are the major trade routes for ships in the world, and we had a little bit of a paradigm shift when ships moved from wooden hulls to steel hulls. They then started to use water as ballast, and water has the fantastic ability that when you are in Hamburg, you just basically can open your hull, you take Hamburg water in, you bring it to the Great Lakes in Detroit, and when you pick up the fantastic American cars over there to export them to Germany, you release the water, and that is then how the pipes of Detroit looks like. Because organisms do not necessarily appreciate to be moved from one place to the next, and you can see what it might take to clean the water pipe system of a city when it's sooted up with that type of stuff. And of course, the Natural History Museum in Chicago or in Berlin have the collections to tell you what this is and perhaps even what to do about it. So in a way, we are global, but we are also messing the place up in a big way, and sometimes it comes back to haunt us, and I would argue increasingly that will be the case. We are not just changing the planet in its biodiversity, we are also changing ourselves as society. So this comes from an article in the Financial Times. There will be a few of these coming up soon, which tells you how we are doing demographically. This is people over 60. Today, the blue one is people over 60 in 2050. As you can see, it happens in all continents, and this is the number of people living in cities. So we've changed into an urban and into an aging society, and we are doing so with a rapidly increasing speed. So we are not just changing nature, we are changing ourselves and what may come as challenges from that. And so my claim to fame as a scientist is that I'm one of 3 experts in the world on the sex life of ferns. And when this picture appeared, it has to be in my talks, because here you can see that the fern is carrying the world of innovation. And this article, and I will show you in a minute a very exciting graph, or not so much, out of it. Basically, this article claims that all the big innovations that really benefit mankind have been had in the 19th century, and that the iPad and all of this type of stuff is basically a mere plaything. And in a way, one really wonders when you get up in the morning, what is perhaps more important, the iPhone and the messages from dear leader or whomever, or a glass of palatable water. And the palatable water and the sewage was delivered here, and the message from Donald Trump is delivered here. So, see what you feel is more important to you. Anyway, the fern will carry it. But this is actually where it now becomes a bit more political, and that is that apparently the world, and especially the Western world, is losing its ability to innovate and to generate growth through innovation. So in the Middle Ages, we had an annual growth of perhaps 0.25%. That then, with the Enlightenment, and I'm using Charles Darwin's birthday here, I'm an evolutionary biologist, so that's a good day to start. That is where GDP was, and then with the Industrial Revolution, World Wars, and so on, it increased tenfold, and it is dropping quite rapidly now, which also may contribute to certain political rupture and disruption we see. But the really scary thing is that we are going back to the Middle Ages if we are not having a look at how innovation can be accelerated. And especially in the world of biodiversity, I can tell you, evolution had 4 billion years' time to find smart solutions to live on this planet, and we are nowhere near scratching the surface of this innovation. So plenty to do, especially when you run a natural history museum. There's also quite interesting other now historical studies on innovation that complement the study done on growth in the Western world, and that is there is a big question mark whether the movement and the dynamic can be cured, and that institutions, and my institution, your institutions, one way or the other, we all claim we are part of the growth, science, innovation system in the world, is probably a bit of a myth. Because it seems to be that while we claim we are the institutions of innovation, we may not necessarily be. And where are, or what makes the organizations that really foster innovation are quite difficult. So here we have one of the people that really did something for all of us. He developed modern transport systems. That is Josiah Wedgwood. He really had an impact on all of our lives, and he has never been anywhere near a scientific institute or a publisher in his life. So we need to perhaps to take a rather outside view, and we may have to have a look at what institutions or what communities we need to get the system for all of us and our benefits going again. So, what I would argue is that we live in a knowledge society governed by science and technology, and I feel rather comfortable living in this world. But in order to sustain a democratic knowledge society, we need both. We need scientific and societal solutions. Where the innovation, where the smartness is going to come from, we as institutional science cannot necessarily claim that we have all the answers, and we need to have a look at ourselves and see how we can open up ourselves to disruption from the outside and from the inside in a much, much smarter way. Otherwise, we are going to lose so much trust, and it's going to go already. The forces that want to show us that they are smarter than us are out there, and they are actually going about it, in my opinion, quite cleverly. So, if we want to sustain democratic knowledge society, science has to change. No innovation without participation is Sheila Jasanov's phrase for that, and I think we need to think what this means for us. We have new ways of communication that can be used for good, that can be used for evil, and as far as my experience as a director of a major global natural history museum, but also in other forms, is that society wants to actually engage with us, and perhaps we are the ones who are preventing them from doing so. So up comes the EU, being aware that it spends a lot of money on science, that it does a lot to encourage a European knowledge society, but are there ways to improve the whole thing? So the EU says, let's have a look at what guiding principles could be. Deep change might be a good one. I'm an evolutionary biologist, so Red Queen hypothesis is in my blood. Deep change is what is needed. Process of concerted action. Who are the players? Who are the stakeholders? How can we bring across Europe people together? And then, is there a need for change? There are some principles here. Knowledge needs to be shared. It needs to be done so out of necessity, and if it's publicly funded, it should become freely accessible, and so on and so forth. So a draft EU open science policy is developed out of this process, and here are the 5 major things. These are all very big. They are big headlines. How they're going to be implemented at EU member state or other stakeholder levels is a long-term game, but I think the headlines fit very well to what needs to be looked at. That is how we can foster an open science culture, how do we remove barriers, how do we develop research and infrastructure for the upcoming open science, how do we then mainstream open science access to research results. That is probably a major part of your deliberations here. And then the other thing, and that's where I'm pretty keen on, is how do we engage, embed, encourage society to be part of the change in science as such. All big claims. I know it's a long way to go. I know there are lots of bumps on the road, but I think the direction is the right one. There are plenty of responsibilities and needs for system change. I don't need to read them all to you, but you can see here what they are, and many of them will touch on what you are doing or what you as a business have to imagine for you in the future. The Open Science Policy Platform has 25 members. They all are not there as individuals. They are there because they have a role. So I come in from the European Citizen Science Association. I represent that branch of the open science as a whole. Research organizations, publishers, platforms, libraries, they are all included in this group that meets twice yearly, but has working groups and so on and so forth going along. So what do? We try to bring stakeholders and knowledge communities together. There are expert groups in the EU. There's the knowledge that you have accumulated that you bring to the table. There's plenty of thought, intelligent and concise about, but we have to take all of these huge amounts of documents and distill them into short sentences, 3, 4, 5 half-page documents that are palatable to EU ministers. So that's basically our big job, condensing it right down to the bare essentials, finding consensus around the table, what we can agree on, and then advise the Intergovernmental Competitiveness Council. And we hope that in May this year, a comprehensive report, probably 2-3 pages long, on what major EU recommendations the Intergovernmental Competitiveness Council might want to take will be delivered. There you have the member states, and the member states then need to have that trickling down into their organizations. The other thing is that all the 25 members of OSPP also have the remit, but that might come later, to take all what we've decided there and try to implement it in our own stakeholder communities we serve for and in. So, I think open science is coming. There are plenty of dynamism in their grassroots. Very, very impressive how many ideas, technology platforms, innovations are going on there. That is setting the community free. That is probably what is generating this innovation culture. It's science-driven, technology-driven, and it's citizen-driven. There's one shared agenda, and it's really smart of the EU to bring the different agendas and actors together. It's not always easy, but I think it's worthwhile having the discourse. So what can citizens do? Here you actually see two people with different science careers. Here you see a scientist becoming sort of a servant of citizenry, and here you see a citizen or a religious scholar becoming the man who changed the way how we see the world, Charles Darwin, without a beard. In the world of science, you have different forms of engagement with citizenry, and biology or natural history is the biggest way to engage people. So you have the passive observers, you have active participants, and you have eye-level collaboration. This top form here is mainly concerned to rare diseases where concerned parents pool resources to commission specific science in their interest. So the role of science has to be to look at where the ambitions and drivers of the citizenry are, engage with them at the level that they want, so learn to listen as a scientist, and then try, if you can, to bring people from a passive observer to become active, or from an active to be a co-producer. That is a process that, especially this one here, that requires a huge amount of funding. So if science wants to change, I think 10-15% of its funding needs to go in order to engage society properly and making them really interested in what we do, and thereby stabilizing science as a valued part of societal discourse and progress. That would be quite a disruption to the entire process as well. Whether we can go with it as fast as open science goes, I have no idea, but I'm certainly going to argue for it. Citizen science is coming into your realm quite heavily. Already by 2012, a large amount of peer-reviewed publications acknowledges the contribution. I need to get an update on this. You can see if the trajectory holds like this, then public engagement in science, also at the scholarly level, is going to accelerate very dramatically. What is also happening, and that I think is a bit more interesting, is how funding of science in the realm of public engagement with science or citizen science is already changing. So in the US, you now have up to 50% of these co-production projects not being funded out of the state system any longer. So the monopoly, especially in Europe, that science funders have may be breaking down if foundations or individuals with large cash come in themselves. This, of course, leads also opportunities for abuse in inverted commas, but that is inherent in all and any system. So how does citizen science look like? This is one of the projects I was involved in the UK. It managed within 3 years of active work to engage. It was an England-wide program, so it engaged about 2% of the English, or 3% of the English population. 20% came from not necessarily favorable social backgrounds. It engaged a lot of schools, but the funniest thing was in the end that it actually got the UK Government Civil Service Reform Award. So at least somebody is recognizing that there's a systemic impact that one can have by looking at things differently. Citizen science globally is organizing itself. Many of us are trained scientists, so we know how to work within the system. And in the EU, it has really, really taken off, especially with the help of EU programs, where, as you know, citizens can actually apply for research funding. And now here in Germany, the BMBF has started to experiment with funding for citizen science, but chosen the route at this stage to go through scientific organizations, which is probably quite a smart one if you want to ensure quality control and see whether the experiment really works. So now trying to conclude, where do I see all of us going? And it may be quite interesting to talk also to you as distinguished people in this field, where you can see your contribution personally or as an industry. So I would argue that there's a big societal want in participating in the development of society and science. I think science will greatly benefit from opening itself up to different perspectives. We are a fantastic echo chamber in ourselves, not just that we need to complain about other echo chambers. I think it opens minds. But I don't want to bore you about it. Examples where scientists really had to look at their own work when they got challenged through interventions from the outside and society. I think we have fantastic advances in technology and communication that will ease this transition. And in general, I think science, which is not an old discipline, institutionalized, probably 150, 200 years. So in the whole realm of human endeavor, it's a short period of time, especially when you look after dinosaurs like I do. It is a short period of time. I think we need to look at the way how we want to work. What will we get? Probably some smart solutions to maintain human existence on this planet. I think it would be really fun to having a more scientifically literate citizenry, would get you a lot more readers, I would argue. We need dynamic, adaptive societies, given the challenges that we've created in this world. Open innovation is necessary and it's fun. And a truly open science system, I think, would be a fantastic innovation for the world to have, and I think it might solve a number of issues. So, fostering discourse, engaging society, enabling innovation, and reinventing science, I think, is the way. And as I'm talking to you as business, this is also something that I've picked up from the Financial Times. I've just added our lovely biodiversity wall, so the smartness of 4 billion years of change and evolution underneath. And that is apparently how capitalist society works. So for me, I'm on the side of deep change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very interesting insight into another dimension, I should say, of how science is being performed, in particular how open science is being performed, a dimension which probably not many of us have really on their radar screen. But I guess this is a good motivation to think about this even more, and thank you very much for this insight. We do have time for 1 or 2 questions. Please.
So, when I talk to researchers, they are very well warming up to the idea of citizen science. Some are welcoming it enormously. Others say, well, it's another thing we have to do for our funders, that sort of motion. And maybe the average researcher is somewhere in between. What would you say to them? What would be the convincing argument? And in that, what can publishers do more to support citizen science?
I think one of the big hurdles, and I don't have a solution to it because it needs to be found within the communities, is the way how we currently address reward systems in scientific academic work. And I think we need to look at that because if we give scientists a bit more leeway, if we look at the impact and relevance of their work as well as excellence and find ways how to judge all of this, I think it makes it easier for them to open up to this type of co-production. And in a way then for you as publishers, if you get really innovative, interesting work, you would be lucky to be able to publish it. So I think it's in the academic system and how it is currently performing and seeing itself with all the opportunities and the challenges or barriers it creates that we need to have a look at so that more people can participate. I see, not just in my museum, but across the science system, more and more young people come up who are global citizens, who have education in many, many places, who are sort of very value-driven, and they want to do something good, they want to give something back, and they do not want to just slave on the workbench all the time. They want to look at the relevance and impact of their work deeper, and engaging with society, I think, is a fantastic way to do that. And the added benefit, in my opinion, is it stabilizes a democratic society from which we all benefit because it allows us and you also the freedom to operate your business or me to conduct my life how I want it. So I think we really need to look at that in a much more holistic way and see how we can change the way how we educate or condition the next generation of scientists.
As far as I understand open science, and now civil citizen science as it is being done today, the contribution of the citizens is mostly collecting data or collecting objects. Are there ways to engage the citizens also more in the interpretation of the data? Because I think that is one what really counts and what makes them more sensitive of what science is all about.
I think that is the big step that is happening. So, for example, as I told you, in my museum, one of the main scientific crafts we exercise is describing the living world. And that is a formalized scientific process, but at the same time as having a whole number of highly trained professors and other scientists, we have about 150 amateurs who come in and do the same task as well. So more and more, I think we will see co-production of knowledge, where people can talk to each other and where scientists and people from society work together to interpret the results. I mean, Galaxy Zoo out of Oxford, the type of stuff they do, protein folding, discovering new solar systems or planets. The last headline was 5 planets, 5 new potentially habitable planets were discovered by citizen scientists out of Hubble. There's lots and lots going on. Very often, the mass projects you see, where you see mass participation, the eye-catching one are data collecting. But that is, I think, becoming more and more the minority. The stuff that is going on in the background, where people are being training themselves to be on par with citizens in particular fields, is winning.
Thank you. I just got a signal that I need to have a look at my watch, and we all have to thank Johannes Vogel again for this nice contribution. And